Good evening. Tonight, I've got with me Ben, and we're going to do a roundup of the news because there's always a lot of news, but there's even more news this week. And first, we're going to have a look at what's happening in Iraq. This general that is actually, or major, is it? Well, a very high rank anyway, has actually been assassinated. So, Ben, over to you because I don't know too much about it.
Well, I've only just heard about this myself, and I've been trying to do a lot of homework because I'm planning on doing a live stream on Panwo TV tomorrow about this. But there's been an attack in Iraq by American forces. They have carried out a drone strike on a car that's just driving out to Baghdad airport, and this car contains the car is the guy in the car is a guy called General Qasem Soleimani. Now, he is the head of Quds. Now, Quds is Iran's foreign exploratory forces that basically are active in other countries. He's very senior in the country. He's very famous, actually. He's kind of like almost like a pop soldier, you might say, in Iran. He's also an advisor to President Bashar al-Assad, who is the president of Syria, that has been engaged in a war with the Al-Nusra Front in his country for God knows how many years now. But basically, this is part of the Islamic State, which has emerged in that area, in the Syria-Iraq area, over the last decade or so. And now President Trump has said that he ordered the strike, and that he said it was justified. He says that basically Soleimani has been organizing the Quds attacks on American assets in the area, including the recent protests outside the American embassy in Iraq. In Baghdad, there's been some huge protests where a number of people were harmed, and basically the staff had to be evacuated. There was a big riot outside. It was a riot, not a protest, outside the U.S. embassy in Baghdad. And there's been several other attacks. In fact, there's people saying, and President Trump himself has been retweeting people who are claiming that Soleimani was behind this terrible incident in Benghazi in Libya, where the U.S. consulate in Benghazi was attacked by a mob, and the ambassadorial staff were killed. The ambassador and his staff were murdered by this mob. They were lynched, and it's the same mob that basically killed President Muammar al-Gaddafi as well. In the same, that was I think the following year, but President Gaddafi was also killed in Iraq by the same mob. Now,
I come to mind, but
sorry,
the words CIA come to mind.
Well, this is an interesting thing, isn't it? Because I'm getting a bit confused about exactly what's going on here. Now, I don't know, because like Trump is saying this is justified. They're saying this is simply a retaliatory strike against a man who is out to basically destroy the U.S. assets in the area and attack U.S. people, Americans in the area, and has killed a number of them. On the other hand, he has been assisting. He's an assistant to Bashar al-Assad. Now, we know that President Trump carried out 2 strikes within a year of each other on Syria, 2 airstrikes on Syrian air bases with missiles, cruise missiles fired from ships that blew up several hangars and destroyed some aircraft, killed some people in Syria. We also know that there's been an agenda controlled, as you say, by the CIA, by Mossad, by basically the Western intelligence, basically a division or a detachment of Western intelligence assets and agencies, to insert these the mobs that have been doing this, that eventually, ironically, that Soleimani has been helping Assad push back, have been created by Western intelligence agencies as well. Now, this includes what's known as the Islamic State and the Al-Nusra Front, and indeed, I don't know what they're called, but basically the people who took over Libya and killed Gaddafi and killed those people in Benghazi, they were created, and they were funded, they were armed, they were trained by these same intelligence operations. And indeed, the first person to blow the whistle on this was somebody who, and Monty Mole puts very correctly here, Mossad wage war by deception. That's their motto. That's the motto of the Mossad intelligence paramilitary agency. And that's absolutely true, Monty, absolutely true. And you know that there's the first person to blow the whistle on this was long ago in the 1990s. It was David Shayler. David Shayler was an MI5 officer in Britain, along with Annie Machon, who was his partner and was a fellow officer. He went public and said that basically, and he was castigated in the media for this, and he had to go into hiding. He went on the run. He ended up in France. He was extradited. He was jailed as well for a while. All kinds of things like that happened, but no one in all this media frenzy, no one actually in the mainstream media actually was talking about what he actually said. What he actually said was that MI5, his own organization, was training and arming these insurgents in Libya that had been responsible for bombings and shootings and all kinds of other attacks and violence in that country dating back to the 70s.
Well, it's destabilization, isn't it?
Yes, to destabilize that particular regime. Now, I'm not a fan of Gaddafi or his regime in Libya, but what's it been replaced with? It's been an authoritarian, but fairly an authoritarian socialist, but otherwise vaguely functional regime has been replaced by a much greater evil. Essentially, a radical Islamist government now exists in Libya.
Well, that's right. And also, when Gaddafi was actually in power, it was like it stopped mass migration from most of Africa into Europe, and now plugged and pulled. But I think that the real reason why Gaddafi was taken out and why they went in is because he wanted to buy oil in gold, not dollars.
Not only that, but he planned to set up a bank, what he called the Bank of Africa, that's based on the gold standard.
Yes, that's right.
That's another thing. Yep, that's enough. And Monty said, whatever happens in the Middle East, there's always one small country that was once called Palestine that gains from it. Unfortunately, Monty, yes. And Israel are cheering on President Trump at the moment. It seems to be entirely within what they wanted. And the gold standard Bank of Africa would have done a huge amount to lift that continent out of poverty. Not only that, but Gaddafi was going to use basically create irrigation within Libya by bringing water underground from aquifers up to the surface and using it. Now, the Sahara Desert is a huge dry area, but on the surface, yes, but underground there are aquifers. Aquifers are underground lakes, and there is millions and millions of gallons of fresh clean water underground in the Sahara Desert, and he was going to bring that up, and he was going to use it to irrigate farmland. This is honestly, this is what got his card marked. I mean, I think the financial thing most of all, the fact that because they are oil exporters, they were going to have a gold standard bank. Now, the gold standard was abolished in several stages through the black nobility, partly through the black nobility long ago in the Middle Ages, but I think primarily through the creation of the Bank of England by the House of Orange, by King William of Orange, who was he was a Dutchman, and he became King of England after the Battle of the Boyne. He deposed James II in Ireland. For some reason, they went over to Ireland. There's a big long story about why that was, but then also with the creation of over the United States of the Federal Reserve. Yes. Which is basically a cartel of private banks. I recommend Beast from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin. Ever since that day came, all hell has broken loose in this. And basically, that I think is one of the biggest steps towards creating a lot of the problems we see in the 20th century. And for example, I mean, someone said something very interesting once. The war, these terrible wars like the Great War, 1914 to 1918. You see, if it hadn't been for that, if it hadn't been for the drop in the gold standard, that war would not have happened. And it's for a very, very simple reason. No one would be able to afford it. That war, which killed 12 million people, only happened because the Bank of England lent money to both sides in that war.
Yes.
To pay for the armaments, including the poison gas, which devastated, which caused people's skin to burn off and their lungs to be destroyed and their eyes to fall out. That was only possible because of fiat currency. So the gold standard would have prevented that, because the gold standard doesn't allow that to happen. The gold standard stabilizes the currency, and it prevents. Yeah, and you can. And I don't know the exact details of it. I'm not an economist, but in terms of credit, the whole credit system is changed as well under the gold standard in some way.
When I was growing up, I lived amongst World War I veterans. I was very young at the time. I'm talking about the 60s. and there was Mr. Pinder, his name. He's a really nice man. He's obviously long gone now, but and he was in the First World War, and he was subjected to a gas attack. And he, as far as I know, I don't think he smoked. And he and his wife were really nice people. And it used to sound as if he was coughing his lungs up. And that was due to a gas attack in World War One. So I thought I sort of add that in. But people don't realise is that World War One. Okay, we all know that it started in 1914. I believe it was August 1914. But the propaganda to get people G'd up for it started 20 years earlier.
Really? Right. Is that like anti-German propaganda thing? I should point out that Monty Moles recommended Nick Hollestrom's book, and I also recommend it. I've done a video where I actually filmed Nick talking about his book. Yeah, I agree, Monty. Good book. I like Nick. He's a good guy.
Some people, he said, a living being has said some people still fund both sides of every major war. Spot on.
I'm sure that's, I mean, obviously the armaments are coming, both sides are in, the United States exports weaponry, basically. That's its only major industry now, is exporting weaponry, mostly to Israel, but also to many other countries. So, yeah, I mean, wars are business. Wars are an industry. But, Chris, you were saying about the propaganda starting to, sorry to interrupt there, you were talking about you were talking about your propaganda for the Great War 20 years earlier.
That's right. That's why
1894 and beyond.
Around about that time, because in 1905, you know that there was the Russian-Japanese war, where Japan
That's right, yeah,
war each other. Well, what happened is a Russian a battleship that was actually, because two shipyards, Arnold and Wolff, and I can't remember the other one, were actually supplying both sides with ships, because the armaments trade then was battleships. Whatever country had the best battleships was the bully boys, and Britain had the biggest navy, I think, in the world at that time. And can you imagine the rivalry between the two shipyards? You know, and it's true, they did actually go to pubs. They used to chalk up on the boards what ships they've sunk and whatever.
It's unbelievable, isn't it?
It's horrendous. But what I was going to say is that in 1905. A Russian battleship accidentally fired upon a British trawler and sunk it. And there was outrage in the news, and the people wanted Britain to declare war on Russia, and it was a mistake. It was an error. And you know, and there was a lot of anti-Russian propaganda at that time. But what happened is that if there's any outrage, you know, you see at the moment in the news, you know, Muslims this, Muslims that, Muslims the other, you know, halal meat and all this, that. But it's like that with Germans. It's anti-German propaganda, and it's hyped up all the time. And there is reason to believe that the British Secret Service were doing some naughty little things behind the scenes to hype it up even more. And when war was declared, people they were pleased that war had been declared. And they were actually, there was a slogan going out, you know, enlist now because it'll be over before Christmas and you'll miss it. It's like a holiday.
Oh, God, yeah.
Britain's got such superior weapons. We'll just wipe the floor with Germany. And that's what people were doing. It was called war fever. And that's why people were falling over themselves for this war. And they didn't realise what was going to happen. But I won't go into the Bradbury Pound because, I mean, I think everybody knows about that already.
We talked about it on the previous show. It's interesting.
That's right. Yeah. But war always is, that's why they call it the theatre of war. It is a theatre because you have to have a justification for war. And after the First World War, there was no justification. But there's certainly a justification for it after the Second World War. And this is the thing. You know, we go to war to kill the nasty person and we're the good guys, and the story ends there, which it doesn't.
No, the nasty people change depending on the political situation. The nasty bad guys change depending on the political situation. But the very same propaganda methods are used, and we've talked on previous shows about some of the propaganda methods that were used to get the war going. For example, we talked about the Germans who they bayoneted the little babies in Liège. Carried the blood-soaked corpses on their bayonets. And they parade around the town with these little babies. And of course, it was a complete fabrication. This monstrous act never happened. But it was repeated in every newspaper. And it got people cleaned. And people just were queuing up at the recruiting stations. And it's and that then is repeated again and again. Indeed, even within a single generation, we've seen the transformation of some people from good guys into bad guys, the same people, very, very quickly. For example, if you go to, say, in the late Cold War, the propaganda of the late Cold War portrayed the people, basically the Islamic insurgents in Afghanistan as heroes, the Mujahideen.
I remember that.
Yeah, you get like books like Cardinal of the Kremlin by Tom Clancy, and the film that was made of that. You get the film Rambo 3, the First Blood Part 3, it was called, where the hero, the Sylvester Stallone's Special Forces hero, he goes into Afghanistan and he helps fight the Russians. This was in the late 80s, this film was made. With these heroic, brave, noble people who ride around on horsebacks and they fight against this high-tech army with all the courage that they have. You know, and then literally then the Cold War ends and then there's 9/11 and the war on terror begins. And these very same people become the Taliban, and they are then portrayed as monsters. I mean, the media portrayal of them afterwards as basically dirty, sadistic. They've always got blood stains on their teeth like vampires. You know, long bearded crooks going around going "Allahu Akbar" and things like that. So, the very same people transformed in the public eye within the space of just a few years. And you know what? In the same way that, as George Orwell said, Oceania has always been at war with East Asia. Eurasia are our allies.
That's
very
right.
Few people noticed. It's just very few people noticed. People got short memories, unfortunately.
But do you think this is going to? The way I look on it, and I'm probably going to get quite a few trolls in saying this, is that America is Israel's lapdog, and Israel is in their interest to have Iran wiped off the map, and they're not going to fight it, but they're probably going to get America to do it. And this looks like a beautiful setup for take your partners, please. It's well, as Spike Milligan said in I can't remember the name of the film now, but he said, take your partners, please, for the Second World War. I think it's take your partners, please, for the Third World War.
Yeah, it's horrific. I mean, there's it's trending on Twitter at the moment. We've got hashtag Franz Ferdinand 1914 trending. Now that Franz Ferdinand was the actual heir apparent to the throne of Austro-Hungary, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and he was shot. He was shot dead in Bosnia. And this was the spark that lit the flame, that lit the tinderbox that started this war, which ended up with the death of 12 million people. Now, the idea is that this might be the same. This might be the death of one guy that starts the avalanche. I don't know why President Trump, I stand by what I said about President Trump, but he's just one guy and he is vulnerable. He has a family that has been threatened, I believe. That fire in Trump Tower, I think something similar has happened again. And he unfortunately has succumbed to this agenda. I really do. I do fear where this will go, where this will lead. This could well lead to a more military action. Iran would be a very intimidating enemy. I don't believe that they could overcome the United States, but I think the United States could beat them. The United States armed forces are twice the size of every other nations on Earth. Yet, in doing so, there'll be an enormous amount of destruction. Many millions are going to be killed, and it could end up with use of tactical nuclear weapons. It would result. The end of it will be a massive guerrilla war, just like we've seen in Iraq. And it'll be an absolute catastrophe. It really, really will, and I really am fearful where this will go.
Well, I think that you look at America. It's all big, high and mighty, and we're big Americans, but we've got to remember that in what was once French Indochina, now known as Vietnam, Oriental men wearing woks on their heads with bicycles beat them.
Yeah, you can't beat a determined guerrilla force because they basically blend into the entire population. It's like a fish swims in water. I think it was Che Guevara who said that, and he also led a successful guerrilla war against the Batista regime in Cuba, which ended up in the Cuban Revolution. So it's if a guerrilla war breaks out, then that's it. Then if America decides to stay in Iran and fight that war, they're going to lose again. They're going to have another Vietnam, probably even worse.
Yeah.
Because the means of destruction are far worse than they were, and we have depleted uranium and things like that now. And it's going to be an absolute nightmare, and as Swinderby says. Who's going to benefit from this? Israel are going to benefit from this. They seem to be the linchpin in all this. This tiny little scrap of land, which is wrongly called a Jewish state. It's actually nothing of the sort. It's the Zionist movement and Judaism are two entirely different things, despite the fact that they are conflated. It's going to. It seems to be able to call the shots. It seems to have the ability to call the shots. It seems to have people within the US regime. I mean, John Bolton's gone now, thank God. Trump's got rid of him. But it still has enough clout, and Trump doesn't have the ability to control it. He's obviously unable to contain it. Yeah. And I just think to myself, I mean, God knows how they got him to do it. They may threaten Melania. They may threaten his son, Barron, or one of the other kids. He's got a huge family. He's got a number of children. He's got many grandchildren. The fire in Trump Tower, I think, was the warning shot across his bow. I
think you're right. And when he was first inaugurated, they're briefed on, and I think it was a comedian that once said that, they show you a film of the assassination of President Kennedy from a different angle. And they say, Mr. President, who was that? He's dead.
Bill Hicks.
Bill Hicks, that's it. Yeah. And he was he was close to that, because I saw pictures of Trump coming out and he's as white as a sheet.
Yeah. I think he said, when he said things like drain the swamp, he had no idea what the swamp was. He had absolutely no idea how deep and rancid the swamp really was. I mean, the fact that he's made, I think, a very spirited effort in his attempt to to resist this cabal, and the cabal. But it's been a terrible struggle for him. It looks like the cabal has made a major strike back against him. Now I don't know. As Living Being rightly points out, the millions of Jews who are anti-Israel. Yeah, Judaism and Zionism are two entirely different things.
That's right.
There's people like Gilad Atzmon, who was the guy who was in that band, the Blockheads. And there's many other Jews who are against Israel, and they realise that it's not their homeland. Ironically, Palestine was a Jewish homeland before 1947. There were kibbutzes there. There were synagogues in Palestine. To be honest, I mean, for 1,500 years, they'd actually lived there alongside the Muslims, and they've been quite a stable coexistence, actually, compared to today. The battle between the Jews and the Muslims in what's now Israel is not an ancient conflict. It didn't exist seriously before 1947.
Well, that's right. I mean, we are treading on eggshells.
Yes, Swinderby, yeah, the blockheads.
Because for example, apparently there was a huge protest outside the BBC Broadcasting House by a load of rabbis against Israel, and the BBC just didn't see it. Isn't that strange? Isn't that odd?
Of course, yeah.
And people don't listen to people like Gilad and people like that, because to me, the two different things. Like, oh, you're anti this, you're anti that. No, they're always trying to pigeonhole people. If you say something that person like, you're being pigeonholed.
It's a trick. George Galloway has pointed this out. I'm not his biggest fan, but one of the things Galloway says, which is actually true, is that anyone who criticizes Israel in any way is accused of hating Jews. They're equated with Hitler for criticizing Israel. But it's a propaganda trick. It is and Monty's basically said the same thing here. Yeah, it's a propaganda trick, and they use it because it works. They've admitted it. One of them actually said so. This is what we do. This is why Jeremy Corbyn has been accused of hating Jews. He doesn't hate Jews at all. I mean, I'm not a fan of his, but
I'm not a fan.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie about the man.
But people, when there's pigeonholing, I said this when I was on with talking to Caroline. Now, the Volkswagen Beetle car came out as a picture of Hitler looking at a Beetle when it was a car by Ferdinand Porsche during the Nazi era. So does that mean that if from 1945 to I think it was about the 80s or 90s when Beetles were built, if you said, I'm going to say now, I think they're a marvellous piece of engineering. My God, my word, am I a neo-Nazi? I was thinking of buying a Volkswagen. Oh no, terrible. No, because loads of people bought Volkswagen Beetles. Doesn't mean to say neo-Nazis. I mean, Haynes Workshop manual did a manual on. So does that mean, you never buy a Haynes Workshop manual? They're Nazis. They had a workshop manual for Beetle cars.
Oh, no, Hugo Boss designed their uniforms as well, and AEG, which used to be called IG Farben, you ran the Auschwitz camp. So if you use any of these products, are you a Nazi? I mean, the thing about pigeonholing, as you call it, is that it's a very unpleasant and dishonest piece of sophistry. That's what that is why they do it. And this because it works. They don't care whether it's right or wrong. They just know that it works. They know that most people just surrender to avoid the trouble.
That's right. I mean, look at the transfer agreement. It was the ex-mayor of London who said, well, in 1940, there was the transfer agreement where Germany were transferring Jewish people to Palestine and paying for their passage and paying for their education. Yeah. And it was when America entered into the war. Well, that's something that's in the history books. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's not anything to do with, anything like that. It's an actual fact. But again, it's manipulating history. And I've often said that in history, when you look back, I think you should always sort of take a step back. I'm against any form of brutality against anyone who watches religion. But the real reason for World War II was to stop Germany printing debt-free currency, telling the bankers to go to hell, and abolishing usury.
That's why a lot of wars break out, yeah.
And that's really it, because and I think that it's quite true what they say. The first casualty of war is truth, and unfortunately, the lies are still believed. Can you imagine if World War was fought and there weren't any concentration camps, and there wasn't any? Imagine if that didn't happen. How would they have justified it?
Exactly. It's all about how they can make people think, how they make people think and feel, how they can make you hate. They can make you turn against the entire nationality of people. If you do that, if you look at these people and you say, well, they're to blame. They're to blame for all our problems, whether it's Russians, whether it's the Germans, whether it's the Jews, whoever it might be. And now it's going to be the Iranians. It's been the Russians several times, actually. It's been the Russians 3 times in the space of bloody 150 years. And now it's the Russians again, isn't it? They're hacking computers. Before that, they were the Red Menace. Before that, they were something else. You mentioned in 1905 with the Japanese. So in the space of just over a century, the Russians have been the bad guys 3 times. But if you do that and you persuade enough people, you can make them do anything. You can make them lead you into the most terrible crimes imaginable the world has ever seen.
Well, I think that it's psychopaths. Really, wars are psychopaths' playgrounds, but the psychopaths that start the wars are not involved in them. They take a step back. They get other people to fight in them. Because I've said this time and time again, doesn't matter what religion you are, who you are, what you are, our enemy is psychopaths, regarding what religion or race they are, who are against humans. That's our enemy, not some bloke that lives in another country or has another religion, because most people, regardless of their religion or race, just want to bring up a family, have a quiet life, and just get on with their neighbours. That's the majority of people. And it does anger me when people believe these psychos in power, because without this propaganda and that, I mean, for example, we were told that Japanese kamikaze pilots were absolute fanatics. Well, I've actually been studying that subject, and they were blackmailed into it, and a lot of them wrote down beforehand they didn't want to do it, and they were forced and blackmailed into it. And the Japanese have been looking at their way to film, which, strangely enough, wasn't actually released in this country for some unknown reason.
Of course not. No, it's because of the mythology. The myths has to be. I mean, we lie about the past, and that makes us control the present. Crikey said something very interesting here. An outside enemy also distracts from the enemy within, and that's true. It was
good in that one.
There's that quote, isn't it? It's actually a misquote by Cicero, where he talks about the enemy within, who's more threatening than the enemy without, because they carry their colours openly, whereas the enemy within moves among the body politic, speaking their language and stuff like that. But yeah, it does. I mean, I do wonder actually if this is being done basically because of the problems with Epstein. I mean, this may simply, they're concerned about that more is going to come out about Epstein and the various other people involved, and this is the perfect way of drawing attention away from that.
That's quite interesting. The other thing, I mean, I don't know. Shall we move? Is there anything more on this subject? Because should we move? Have you got any other content on this? Because I was thinking we to Australian fires, or are you okay with this?
There's a terrible situation in Australia right now. Now, Caroline interviewed Max Egan the other day, and I watched a video that Max is a good guy. He's a very good guy. He's an Australian researcher, and he's made several good points. Firstly, this is being portrayed to the world as the effects of climate change caused by human activity, by basically the society we have now, and it's because apparently there's not been enough rain in Australia, which is why these fires have started. Now, first of all, rainfall patterns happen naturally. They adjust themselves naturally over time, but also they can be controlled. Rainfall patterns can be controlled using several methods. In fact, there was a very interesting short documentary, just half an hour long. It was made in 1959 by Disney, so a long time ago. It's a mixture of cartoons and live action, and it's called Eyes in the Sky. And it foresees the use of satellites to predict weather, but not only that, to control weather. And one of those is to control rainfall and the path of hurricanes. Now, what happens in this fictional scenario is this futuristic control room, this weather control room, sends a huge, using several methods, including what we would today call chemtrails and cloud seeding operations towards the rainfall patterns, to cause a hurricane that's heading towards the US East Coast to be deflected back out to sea. Now, obviously, it must occur to somebody that if you can cause a hurricane to move away from the coastline out to sea, you could take a hurricane that is out at sea and deliberately direct it towards a coastline if you wanted to. In which case, you would have a very potent strategic weapon of war. You could actually devastate a nation and put it all down to a freak of nature. Not only that, but someone mentioned just now cloud seeding has been used since the 1940s. Yeah, in fact, the first tests were done in the 1850s on the island of St. Helena, which has an irregular rainfall pattern anyway. And Angie Wright says, how come cloud seeding can't be employed in California or Australia? Well, because exactly. Why can't they do? Because they don't want, because they want those droughts, Angie. That's it. And Monty says it here. Yeah. They want those droughts because the drought serves a purpose. Now, Max was saying basically this is causing the collapse of this could cause the collapse of Australia's society, because Australia essentially is mostly desert. I've been there. It's a very dry. It's a huge continent which is almost entirely uninhabited. It's all empty desert. There are some green areas that account for less than 20% of the entire continent, which is basically where 99% of the people live. And it's around the coastlines, especially in the southeast, New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, that area. And most of the people live in southern Queensland and those other two states. That's where all the fires are breaking out. And Max was saying that they may want to expand the desert in Australia to the point where they may have to depopulate the country. And Max was concerned they may be trying to move people to the empty cities in China. Yeah. Well, actually, we wonder about the weather. Do you remember the COP21 in 2015? That was the climate accord, where the nations agreed to deindustrialize as much as necessary to prevent temperatures on the Earth rising above a certain level. Now, at that very same time that was going on, it was December 2015. I made a video about it. It's on my channel. We had we had the temperature of 22 degrees here in Britain. 22 degrees centigrade in December. That's very, very hot for a winter in Britain. And I just think to myself, is that a coincidence? Did that happen? I mean, it seems incredible, because it just almost wanted to ram the message home. We need to basically we need authoritarian government. We need a global state of emergency, temporary, of course, to save the planet. I mean, if no one's going to agree to live into a dictatorial global state, no one wants to live under a tyrannical regime that covers the planet. No one wants to live out their short lives in to reinforce they do indeed, Angie. They reinforce the climate. No one wants to live out their short lives without any retirement or any holidays on an orbiting prison camp. But they will if you tell them it's the only way to stop the Earth from dying. I mean, the extraordinary. I mean, someone mentioned the Hegelian dialectic earlier on in the chat. Problem, reaction, solution, as David Icke calls it. Yeah. Living being. Yeah, this December that's just gone was one of the warmest, wettest on record. I know, because I work outdoors. It was horrible. It was raining every day. November, I remember there was a bit of ice. It's actually getting a bit colder now. When now we're into January, it's actually getting a bit more chilly. But I do wonder about that living being. Was that artificial? Was that real? You never know now. So you always have to ask these questions whenever extreme weather occurs. That question,
hasn't it? I mean, the last couple of days, I almost climbing up the wall with depression, because I get this sad thing, which lack of light, it sort of gets to me, and it didn't see the sun for about 4 or 5 days. It's this horrible dull cloud. I don't know whether it's like probably the same way you are. But I think that what gets me is that I mean, I go by Piers Corbyn, who I think knows his stuff.
He does, yes, he's brilliant.
He really does. He can prove it scientifically. You know, I'm not a scientist in this area. It'd be secondhand from me. But, you know, about this thing about CO2 and all this waffle about it. Well, there's more levels of CO2 were higher in the Middle Ages than now. I mean, what was it caused by? Gassy beer or something? I mean, you know, it's ridiculous. And if you look behind it, but people suck up to it. They believe it. And this is the most terrifying thing, that people are just gullible to it. So, oh, yeah, you know, we're putting fluoride in the water to dumb you down. Is that okay? Yeah, it's all right. You know, and I think that people won't do anything until the supermarket shelves are empty. Then they'll do something, but that'll be too late then.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
then they'll demand the complete control of food, won't they? It'll be food distribution then. It'll be things like that. It'll be everything is done. I mean, the CO2, you know, control of carbon dioxide, which is simply, in effect, I mean, carbon dioxide is a natural part of our atmosphere. In fact, it's essential for life on Earth. Without the CO2, it's only 400 parts per million in our atmosphere. But as Piers Corbyn says, it's the sun basically which is driving the climate. It's solar activity. Carbon dioxide responds to temperature change. It doesn't cause temperature change. It's an effect of temperature change. And this has got an awful lot to do with plant growth, because when temperature rises, it's to do with plants. It's to do with the number of the number of plants that are consuming and the number of animals that are and other creatures that are bringing out CO2. It's all connected to the oceans as well. So I mean, I think we should, whatever is happening in our world, I always get suspicious when someone says, yeah, there's this terrible problem, and we need to give more money to the United Nations to stop it, or we need to give the governments more power. The state needs to take control of the world more. That's the solution.
Well, that's what they always tell. It's as David Icke says, problem, reaction, solution. I try and avoid the news, as far as mainstream news, as much as possible, because I find it absolutely manically depressing, and it's just propaganda as far as I'm concerned. But what gets me, you listen to the BBC, and it's always, what are you doing to prevent climate change? and it's accepted that it exists. And this is what I find terrifying. And you get people like Piers Corbyn on these BBC programs, and they're laughed at. People like the late David Bellamy, they laughed at him as well. But they were real scientists. They are real scientists, rather. Why should you believe a 16-year-old schoolgirl and David Attenborough, who's actually paid to read the script? He's not a scientist. He's a TV personality, and they just shove the script in front of him and he reads it. He's a plonker. Let's put it here.
Yeah, and right. He's been replaced by Professor Brian Cox, who's the worst of the bunch. He's the most despicable person. I can't abide that man. And David Bellamy, as Monty Mole said, David Bellamy and Johnny Ball, as you mentioned him too. Yes. I remember Monty. I don't know how old you are, but I remember when those guys were household names.
Yes.
I used to watch them on TV when I was a little kid. They used to present Upper Gumtree was David Bellamy's, and then Think of a Number was Johnny Ball, and they were pop scientists, and they were charismatic, likable guys. And then they question Monty. Yeah, you're sort of like, you probably remember these things, and then they dare to question this. They just say, look, I just don't believe in this. Now, there was a time when at least I hope there was a time when people were allowed to disbelieve in something. After all, you're allowed to disbelieve in God. You're allowed to disbelieve in all these other things. Yet, when you disbelieve in climate change, you're not just wrong, you're evil. You're actively evil. I mean, Greta Thunberg is like a brain-damaged teenager who's supposedly 17. I suspect she's 2 or 3 years younger than that. Who has been put up as a mascot by her parents, who are in show business. So I don't believe it's a coincidence. And she's now this figurehead, this poor little child, this brain-damaged kid who must be having such a miserable life believing this stuff. And lots of other kids do. I mean, there's been children killing themselves. They've been committing suicide because they watch this stuff. Kids as young as 12 are committing suicide.
But let's face it, Ben, if we were young, I would find it terrifying. I think you probably, most people will, because when you're young, you're easily impressed by things like, the world's going to end, and all that type of thing. But actually, I'm old enough to remember Dr. Magnus Pike, and I bet you not many people remember him. I bet you don't remember him. No, you're too young.
No, I don't. I know, but I'm familiar with. I've heard the name.
Yeah, he used to throw his arms everywhere. Enormous, great big, and he was quite a charismatic character and very likable. This was long before this climate change rubbish and things like that. And he used to go on to science programs, and he was an eccentric, basically. And he was really funny, but he was very, very informative about things, because he used to go on programs with, I think, Johnny Ball as well.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, but okay, that's a long time ago. Was it? Monty Moller said, I would believe it all if I was young. And I know you. I got wrong, and you know better. Quite correct. Yes.
Well, you see, when you're children, everything is like terrifying. I mean, I remember you feel these. I mean, I personally feel these things much more intensely when I was a child. I was scared of the bomb. I mean, I grew up my childhood encompassed the late Cold War, which when it ended isn't. But I honestly was. You used to have nightmares about being blown up in nuclear war. And we were taught these things at school. We were shown these things at school.
That's right.
And but it terrifies you. This is abuse what they do at school, because now they're showing children this climate change stuff, and the kids are thinking, well, look, maybe we can't do anything about this. Maybe it's too late to stop the Earth dying, because some scientists are saying that. I mean, there's this idiot called Guy McPherson. He goes around on stage and he says there's a conspiracy to do with climate change, but it's not the same one we're talking about. He says the conspiracy is far worse than they're saying, and we're all doomed. And people actually buy tickets to sit in the theatre and listen to this guy. They pay him to tell us we're all going to die. And I think to myself, there's this book called Requiem for a Species. Basically, they're known as doomers.
But it's all pleasurable things.
They must be miserable, and they're making other people miserable.
Which is true. But you look at most of these things, for example, my grandparents and your grandparents feared naughty Germans in the First World War. My parents feared naughty Germans in the Second World War. We feared naughty Soviets, didn't we? They're the younger generation. Then they had a generation fearing naughty terrorists, Middle Eastern men dressed in their nightshirts, walking around with very long beards and brown things with bomb written on them with a fuse going on somewhere. Now we've got to fear the world coming to an end. But when you look at the size of the sun compared with the Earth, it's rather like standing outside a house. Now imagine the house being the size of the sun and having a marble in your hand, and that'd be the size of the Earth. And they say, oh no, it's nothing to do with the sun.
the sun generates all the heat on the Earth comes from the sun. I mean, but look at the distant planets. They're just loads of ice. The only reason the Earth has any liquid water on it is because of the sun. The only reason it's got any air as we breathe is because of the sun. The sun. We're actually in the solar minimum at the moment. But the sun goes through a cycle of 11 years where its sunspots get greater and smaller, and the X-ray emissions of the sun vary during that period. We're at the lowest point in that period now. It's actually a very low minimum. There's only been like a couple of sunspots in the last month or two. I keep a record of these things, so I cover them on my own radio show. I keep record of things.
Let's have a reminder of your radio show. Because
Pano Radio, yeah. I do a weekly report on this sort of thing. Now,
here it is. Here it is.
Now this. Yeah, that's it. That's the one. Yeah. Now, low sunspot cycles have actually been linked, as Piers Corbyn explains, have been linked to actually lower temperatures, not higher temperatures. So if climate change is real, climate does change. It changes naturally. So I suspect that we may be actually entering a much colder period. We may not feel it this year or maybe next year.
We are. It's an ice age, like the Victorians.
Yeah. Now, again, it's something we'll get through. Like the medieval warm period, we'll get through it. We'll survive it.
But the trouble is, we're destroying farmland. We're building loads and loads of housing, which would grow us food during this mini ice age. And this is the problem.
And we're going to need all the farmland we can get because agricultural seasons will be much shorter because of this. Because winters will be longer, they'll be colder, there'll be more snow and ice. So yeah, we're going to need all the farmland we can get. But the farmland is all being taken over. It's all being bought up by China in various countries, especially Southern Africa and Australia. Australia's been a lot of that's been sold off to China. Southern Africa, the countries there, the governments are seizing the land from the farmers in South Africa, and a lot of it's being sold off to China. And God knows what they're going to do with it, but they're not going to be able to grow food on it. Not the way the farmers that have owned and cultivated that land for generations have been doing so. So we're going to see huge famine in many parts of the world, unless, I mean, I say we are. These are not predictions; they're warnings. Because I think that you and I and people like us, like Mark Windows, like Caroline, like many other people, by speaking the way we do with all the people watching us, we can stop this agenda. It's not set in stone. We can reverse it if enough people know. Knowledge is power. It exists through. It only endures because people don't know about it. That's the thing.
Going on to the sort of next sort of topic, which I'm going to bring up with Caroline, because I think she knows something about the EU, doesn't she? I'm joking. But but what people don't realise is that, I mean, well, they do realise that I'm anti-EU, always have been, and I think you are, Ben, as well.
Oh, very much so, yes.
But we've got a show coming up with Caroline where I'm going to be the devil's advocate, a little bit of tongue-in-cheek, a sort of a snotty Paxman type, I'm going to take on. So anybody's got any pro-EU questions, I can put it to Caroline. And we're going to be a bit light-hearted about it, because I can't be, it's not my personality like Pax or anything like that. So, as Benny Hill said, if you're going to do something, take off someone, do it badly, and it's more funny. So it's going to be a bit tongue-in-cheek. But looking at it seriously, what people don't realise is that, and I'm linking this with what's happening in Australia at the moment, is that Australia, New Zealand and Canada propped this country up during World War II, and they sent us aid. Blankets, New Zealand wool, food. People think, food supplies were coming in across from America. Yes, they were also coming from Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and they kept this aid going into the post-war period until Britain got on its feet. And then in 1973, this country told them to get stuffed. And And they literally stopped all, because we went into the EU, they stopped all the contracts with Australia, New Zealand and Canada. We threw dirty water in their face. And a lot of the Second World War generation wrote letters to the embassies, the Australian, New Zealand and Canadian embassies, saying how disgusted they were with the British government, the way they were treating these countries. And it caused a lot of unemployment in those three countries. That, again, has just gone missing in the midst of time.
Yeah. I think the economy seems to function most properly when it's actually unregulated. I'm something of an anarcho-capitalist. I don't know if I'm a purist in that sense. I'm not sure if I'm totally and utterly, but I am, to a certain extent. I do understand that the free market actually is the best way of running an economy. And things go wrong. Whenever regulators get in the way and the state sticks its boots in, that's when problems occur. And if we just allow free trade to remain free, I think that's the best. But of course, that is not what the New World Order is meant to be. The New World Order is meant to be a completely controlled society. I mean, the Agenda 21, if you read through it, it's actually a very extreme form of communism. It's saying quite clearly a completely resource-based planned economy, rations for us, carbon footprints, for the carbon footprints, which I think is meant to be us, and of course, carbon dioxide limits for each person. We're essentially become cogs in a machine, and everything will be controlled for us, which is pretty terrifying. Actually, you won't be able to step out of that. It won't be an option.
But look what they're going to have, I think, in Australia, because now when you look at, I think Max Egan was saying that the area the size of Luxembourg and Belgium, almost the size of Ireland, is burnt to a cinder. It's a huge area. The plume is about just over half the size of Europe as a whole. He showed that on his video.
I know it's been affecting New Zealand. It's been blowing towards New Zealand, and it's been affecting them.
And what's going to happen is they're going to have to say there's going to be loads of homeless people, I think by design, and they'll have to go into smart cities, won't they? That'll have to hurry.
Yeah. That'll be the solution. I'll say probably there may be these empty cities they got in China that he was talking about. That these Australians could be moved into these empty cities in China, because China have been building huge cities when no one's in them.
That's right.
Why do they build cities and not with no one living in them, unless they plan for somebody to live in them? Well, who? I mean, I know China has an enormous population; it's a quarter of the people in the world. But normally, and it's expanding, of course. But despite that, normally these things happen naturally. You don't have to build cities deliberately. You just wait for people to build them for themselves. That's what normally happens. So they're obviously planning for a massive amount of immigration, and where's that immigration coming from? Maybe it is Australia. Maybe they want to move Australians to China. I mean, that could be. I mean, a lot of them live there anyway. A lot of Chinese people live in Australia. Maybe they just want to say, well, let's put them all in one place. Well, Australia can then we just use Australia for something else.
Well, I'm going to throw something now into the mix, and that is going against the grain, in that we've been conditioned to believe that the population's spiraling out of control. There's too many people in the world. Hollywood movies such as Soylent Green and things like that showing these horror situations of an overpopulated world. But there's a couple of researchers in Canada have actually gone into it very, very deeply. We are actually on the edge of extinction because we're not having enough children. The world is going to reach to a peak and then suddenly drop. And they found that what's happened is that, for example, every woman in Europe should be having 2.4 children. I don't know how they get the 0.4 children, but statistically 2.4. And this is off the top of my head. I think it's 1.5. So we're having too many elderly people, and there's not enough young people, and we're depopulating. And they said that in China, it's even worse, that their population will go down, and in a couple of 100 years, the population is just reducing and reducing and reducing. And my theory is the reason they're opening the doors to the third world, to Europe, is to make it look as if we're overpopulating when we're not, because there's areas in Africa where are just deserted that had villages once, vibrant. You know what it is elderly people there because they've left and gone to Europe, the people, and to push this agenda. because if we didn't have mass immigration, our population would be about the same as after World War II, or
It's
somewhere.
shrinking. Yeah.
It is shrinking.
The only population growth. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say the only population growth we're having and experiencing in the West now is for immigration, and it's all part of the plan. It's an industrialized movement of people that the world's never seen, and it's not being allowed to happen. It's being made to happen. It's actually a plan. It's not. It's not just. What you'll find is that people in Africa and the Middle East aren't suddenly getting up one day and saying, "I know, let's go and live in that cold northern areas. Let's go and live there for a change. Let's leave where we are now and go and live there." They're not doing that. It's all being organised. I mean, of course, you'll always get some people who want to do that, but this is something that is planned. It's something that is deliberately being engineered. It's through propaganda and through relaxations in border control and things like that. It is. I mean, that means that Europe's population is growing. North America's population is growing. It's all through immigration. And in 1968, a book was written by Paul Ehrlich called The Population Bomb, which predicted basically the end of the world. And the end was due to come somewhere in the 1980s, where there'd be such mass famine, there'd be a population die-off. But of course, it's now to 2020, and that hasn't happened yet. And the truth of the matter is, the Earth actually is finite. It's finite, and it sometimes looks as if the Earth. So, if the Earth looks as if it's overpopulated, it's because of lifestyle. It's not because of our sheer numbers. There's plenty of room on the Earth for everyone in the world. Everyone in the world could live in one big city, have a house, have a garden, and plenty reasonable space. That would be about the size of France. That's how much space we actually take up. In terms of like food production, again, people say there's not enough food for everyone. Well, half the food we produce from British farms is never consumed. It either rots or it's either rejected by regulators for various reasons. Sometimes the tomatoes are the wrong shape, or the EU says they've got to be a certain size. Or they just rot before they go out of date, because the sell-by date is like about half. There's plenty of things past their sell-by date that are perfectly safe and nice to eat. I mean, I've got a few in my cupboard. I still eat them, but they can't sell them. They're not allowed to sell them. So if there's a shop hasn't sold them by then, they have to throw them away. So there's plenty of food for everyone. There's plenty of space for everyone, and there will be. I mean, I don't know exactly what the bioeconomic capacity of the Earth is. It's not finite. Like, overpopulation could come at some point, but it's not going to come from the 7 billion we've got on the world now. It's going to be many, many times that number before overpopulation actually becomes a problem. And in fact, there's indications that the Earth's population growth is actually slowing across the globe. I mean, in Britain, you mentioned we're only having like 1.5 children per person on average. It's got a lot to do with the fact that biologically we are less fertile. Men's sperm counts are dropping.
That's
miscarriage rates among women. Women are experiencing more miscarriages. Couples are finding it harder to conceive. There's feminism, which tells women they must not have children because the evil, nasty white males are trying to force them to have children, so they're not free. And you have abortion as well. That is babies being killed before they're born. I know that's a controversial issue. I personally am what they call pro-life. Other people have different views, but I think it's a terrible thing. And whatever your opinion of it, you cannot deny the fact that it is reducing childbirth enormously.
Well, if you want to know about with abortion, I actually heard Gemma O'Doherty. She runs the.
I love her. She's great.
Irish anti-corruption party.
She's wonderful.
She's a bit of a hit. She's a hero in them. I think she's marvelous. And she explained on one of her videos what happens during an abortion. It wasn't too graphic. It wasn't too. The children could hear it, and it upset me. It really did. It is really horrendous. And she put it over very, very well. She's a journalist, so she knew how to do it, say it. But I think how can we sort of wrap this up tonight? We're doing quite well tonight, and I'd like to thank everybody in the chat room. It's some really exciting stuff.
Very active, wasn't it? Yeah, we had a lot of really good comments, guys.
Your comments I do apologise because I'm listening to Ben and I'm looking at the chat room at the same time. I'm a bloke, you see. I can't multitask. I'm a bit sort of but oh, hang on, we got one here. Was it? I heard the late Jim Mars say that we could fit the whole of the population to Texas.
Yeah, absolutely, Monty. I mean, in fact, we could fit. It wouldn't be a very densely populated area if we could fit everyone to Texas. Yeah, and there'd be, as I say, more efficient use of farmland would create enough, and more efficient use of food would create a perfectly good enough food for everyone. The overpopulation thing is another scam they're using to scare us and to give them a justification for more control. It's another big scam. Yeah.
That's it. Well, actually, Ben, before we sort of wrap this up, I think you're an author, aren't you?
Yes.
Here. Right, hang on a moment. Let's have a look here. See, I'm showing off with these banners.
Thank you.
Books are available from Amazon. Roswell Rising, a novel of disclosure. Ben Emlyn Jones.
This is the first part of a trilogy, so do pick that up. I think you'll like it if you like the kind of subjects we're talking about tonight. But I want to end. I want to end on a positive note because I am an optimist. I think that the general tide at the moment is progressive. It's moving towards better and better things. Sure, there's been many setbacks, and we've experienced one today, but in the long run, I really do believe that over the years I've seen things improve. I don't believe this new world order is going to succeed. A lot of things have gone against it so badly in the last few years that this can only continue. So don't give up. The fact that we're having this conversation now and there's many, many people listening to it is proof of that. Knowledge is power. If people know about it, the tricks won't work. So don't give up, guys. Don't despair.
Hang on, we've got a few comments here. The youth are being detached from reality, so I doubt they grasp the reality of abortion. That's very good. And we've got here, we are corralled like cattle. Yes, Monty. And we got another one. Monty, and still have plenty of wildlife areas, parks and farms.
Exactly. Yes, we don't have to destroy the natural world. The natural world, we can coexist with the natural world if we live correctly and naturally. If we ourselves live naturally, we'll be fine. Yeah.
And what is it? The president said, who said, was it humans and fish can coexist? That was Bush, wasn't it? George Bush Jr. Yes, humans and fish can coexist. Well, I don't think he's
the kind of person who wanted us to coexist, but yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
It's been good. It's been a good show, Chris, and thank you very much for having me on again. And I look forward to doing some more.
Please come on again. I hope we can have a regular time because the Thursdays are usually the regular ones with Mark Windows and Caroline. Unfortunately, Caroline won't be on next Thursday because her Wi-Fi is kaput next to Wi-Fi. So I don't know whether you can, normally it was Wednesdays, but you'll be, if you'd like to come on next week, I'm sure we have a good week.
I'll find it out. We'll sort something out, Chris, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I've got to do my own shows and things, but yeah, definitely I will do. I'd like to.
Thank you very much for joining me tonight, and thank you very much for Ben, and thank you very much in our chat room. Absolutely.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for listening and for commenting.
Excellent. And good night. And Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Thank you.